Do you know what the latest science says about how you can grow as an athlete and enjoy your sport more? Well, the aim of this podcast is to dive into the science, take out some aspect of it, look at it, and then apply it in a real world way to you in the hope that you can do just that. Get more out of your sport. I'll be having these conversations every week with my fellow coach, Scott Finley, who is also a PhD student, so understands that scientific background, but also works in the real world with real athletes just like you. And so we will try and apply the scientific knowledge to you in your real world environment in the hope that it's helpful. So we hope that you enjoy the conversation that you're about to listen to and that it helps you get the most out of your sport.
Hello and welcome back to the Elevate Multisport Academy podcast. My name is Scott. I'm here with Joel. Joel, how are we doing this morning?
Yes, very good. Thank you. End of a long and tiring week, but nearly, well, we're at Friday. We're nearly at the end of the week.
Yeah.
And feeling good and looking forward to the chat.
Good stuff. We are talking this week about habits. We've got a massive paper to discuss, and I think it's kind of one of those ones that maybe open us up for a few more podcasts on this topic, especially if people are enjoying them. So the title of the paper is Habit and Physical Activity, Theoretical Advances, Practical Implications, and Agenda for Future Research. So as always, we're going to jump straight into some quick fire questions. So Joel, number one, can you resist habits?
Probably unsuccessfully in the medium to long term.
Okay, time scale on it, that was good. Can you retrain habits?
Yes.
And then a slightly more personal one for you. What is one good or bad habit that you have?
Great. I love that we don't rehearse these at all. Good or bad habit? Too much breakfast cereal at night time. And I've had to change my environment so that is less of a temptation. But interestingly, changing the things in the way that I have has meant that actually the habit's been broken quite easily.
And realistically, there are worse habits than too many Cheerios.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Oh, it's when it gets onto the chocolate shredders though. That's the death blow.
Okay, grand. Thank you very much for those. We're going to dive straight in. So this was a narrative review, which basically just means that they're drawing evidence from a range of papers to systematically come to a conclusion. So this isn't a systematic review, it's a narrative review. And the main difference here is that systematic review, you search you use keywords to search, and you maybe search through 2,000-3,000 different papers, which helps with bias a little bit, but the narrative review, you kind of just pick and choose bits to sort of help tell the story. So the story this paper is talking about is habits in relation to physical activity. And just quickly, definition, he defines physical activity any physical activity which has the potential to promote health. So exercise, active travel, stair climbing, etc. Okay, we're going to start off with some of the basics. What is a habit? So I took this quote from the paper. Habitual behaviors are inextricably linked to the cues or contextual features that give rise to them. They also specify the specific features of the behavior and its experience, and identify processes and factors that lead to their development and maintenance and lead to their extinction. So that was a lot of science talk, but I think the key bit is cues and contextual features.
And this feels like a classic paper, Scott, where you, with your very brilliant academic mind, have picked it out, and I have to kind of translate it into basic speak in my mind. But I think that there's some real value in that. So for me, when it talks about this cues and context, what we're talking about is environment. So I think what it suggests is that the environment that we create for ourselves, or the environment that we're placed in, like we might have a job and that requires us to be in a certain place with a certain team and with certain tasks in a certain environment, almost entirely dictates the habits that we start to build in our life. And so I think that there's a suggestion that you need to recognize that and then see what is changeable about that to then knock on to kind of behavior. But essentially, the message there, I think, is environment is key. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think that I mean, from a cues and contextual features, I think when we get onto development, we can maybe talk about it. But it's little things like if you're in an office beside a McDonald's and all your workmates go out and get McDonald's, and the rubbish is sitting on the table, that's a bit of a cue for you to go and get your lunch from McDonald's as well, which obviously is a bad habit if you do it every day.
Yeah, but we spoke about cues, right? And that can be so many different things. And that's why I think this is interesting, because we don't notice this stuff. But it's that wafting smell of the McDonald's that drifts in through the office window on like a nice spring morning or something. And it's that's a cue, directly a cue. And there's the challenge is then, how in control of our behavior choices are we then? And that's where nutritionally, in terms of our current westernized context, there are so many factors working against us choosing healthy, wholesome habits that are going to drive our well-being, because there are so many pushing us away from kind of health. And there are so many things that are, it's really hard for things like good diet, good exercise behaviors, physical activity. Those habits, they're not so loud in our environment, I guess, and in westernized culture. And that's probably something that we have to change. And it's the things like the supermarkets are doing, moving the sweets away from the tills. But that doesn't feel like it's nearly enough if this paper is right and the environment is really key in our habit forming.
Yeah, and I mean the key thing with that, so that specific example, the supermarkets moving the sweets away from the tills, is they don't want to do that. They had to be told to do that. So one of the kind of key books in this area is Nudge, and I really can't remember the author, but the interesting thing is that this nudge theory that you can be nudged into making specific choices, putting the fruit on the top shelf so that's what you see and all that sort of stuff. But the thing is, that book was written for people to use that for the benefit of improving health, but obviously companies are using it the opposite way as well, which is nudging people to buy their unhealthy products and things like that. So it's a kind of arms race, isn't it?
It is the classic thing of taking you past or wants to get to your needs. It's like that's just embedded into so much kind of high street and shop design, isn't it? So we're at the mercy of our environment, and so creating sometimes the habits that we would like to create, that we maybe have the goal of creating, are actually really, really difficult because we're fighting an invisible force.
Excuse me interrupting the conversation for just 20 seconds. If you're new to the platform, there are 3 things you can do. When you finish listening to the podcast, take our 6 keys to unlocking your potential course. It's completely free. Then please sign up to the Team Elevate community. It's a great place to meet like-minded athletes who are on a learning journey just like you. And thirdly, if you liked what you found, you can sign up to our monthly membership plan, which gives you access to all of our resources, both now and in the future. So we hope to see you there soon.
Yeah. Okay, let's move us on to another quote from the paper. So just again, thinking about what a habit is it, so an example here, for example, observing that your neighbor goes jogging at 7 a.m. every morning may lead you to infer that she jogs habitually. However, your observation provides no information on the conditions that determine her jogging. You would, for example, fail to see that her mother provides her with a hefty financial reward for doing so, a reinforcing contingency that controls her behavior, and in its absence, her jogging behavior may desist. So basically, that's kind of saying that something may be a habit for some person, but might not be for another. The obvious thing there is that just because there is a financial reward at the outset doesn't mean that the jogging won't become a behavior. There's a whole area of research using financial incentives for improving people's health, and relatively good evidence that it does work.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example, actually, and I'd love your take on it, because as I listen to it, I feel like the author is trying to challenge the notion that that person's jogging is a habit, whereas I would say it is a habit. Her mother, through the gift of the money, has created an environment, the context and the cues, so that running takes place, and we don't know why that is. Maybe it's because she's a performance athlete, or maybe it's because she needs to get a little bit more healthy, and the mum's trying to provide a kind of motivation or something. But in either way, I feel like what's happened there is that an environment's been created so that a positive habit in the context of that person has been formed. And although I think our idea is that we're going to kind of try and keep it quite a high line today and go into some of the more how do we form habits in the next podcast, um I do challenge whether that I feel like, yes, the suggestion is that's not a habit, whereas I think it does sound like a habit to me. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the insinuation is that from the outside it might not seem like or it might seem like a habit, and maybe it's not quite there. I think that there is a habit there. The habit is maybe the fact that the person is getting up and getting ready. So the cue is more about the exchange of money than the desire to go jogging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think the key thing is, yeah, as you said, it's about the habit being formed. So certainly at the start, the habit was not formed.
Yeah.
But over time, it will be. If this happens for a few months, that it's likely that it will become a habit, and maybe they really, really hate it, and they're sort of dragging themselves through the run because they know that they get the reward at the end. And in that case, I feel like it's probably less likely to become a habit.
Yeah.
But I totally agree. There's definitely a habit in there, and whether it's just the exchange of money or the actual jogging.
Yeah, and there's an interesting conversation there as well, isn't there, about, so if she's being extrinsically motivated at the moment, we've talked before about intrinsic motivation generally being a better positive driver of behavior change. So we kind of want the extrinsic motivation to shift to an intrinsic motivation. And then there's a conversation about motivation v habit, whether those two things work together, whether one is more powerful than the other. To a degree, I kind of think as long as you get the desired outcome and that's life affirming, then that's potentially what the greatest concern is. But yeah, the debate between motivation v habit, I think, is interesting, and I think it sort of pitches the Simon Sinek start with why against the James Clear atomic habits stuff. It'd be interesting to dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that tees me up perfectly for the next bit, talking
Great,
about
that was my hope.
That was intentional, was it? Yeah. Automaticity, and the fact that habits are automatic. And what it might be is that it's not a case of this versus this, but a combination. So this versus this being motivation versus habits. It's a combination of the two. And maybe from a sporting context, maybe sometimes it's the habit that drags you out of bed for your 5 a.m. swim, and some mornings it's the motivation. But saying that, I think for it to be a habit, it's kind of always underlying. So maybe there is a kind of hierarchy of of power that can draw you out of bed for training.
Is habit the same as discipline?
So, well, again, teeing me up for the next bit. I'll read this quote because this is talking about how it's supposed to, or again, from a definition point of view, habits are kind of automatic. So theorists and researchers have identified a series of key defining characteristics of habits. Automaticity is considered a key characteristic. Habits tend to be enacted with little conscious awareness, and as a consequence, occur rapidly and efficiently with little effort. And then, from a kind of neuroscience point of view, habits may have an adaptive function, enabling complex cognitively costly actions to be enacted with little deliberation, thereby freeing up processing capability for higher order strategic processing. That's kind of evolutionary biology reason for habits, I suppose. But the automaticity enacted with little conscious awareness. So what was the question you asked before again? Sorry, it was, are habits...
Is discipline the same as habit?
Discipline, same as habits. So I think discipline will lead to habits, is my view on that.
I think the same. It feels to me like I think that your automaticity word, never said that before in my life, but the automatic bit of habit, when we try and define habit, I think that's a really key bit that I would try and take away from this, is that like almost a true habit, when it's a proper habit, it's really ingrained and automatic. Now that's where we want good habits to be, but it's not where we want negative habits to be. So there's a self-awareness piece here, a bit like the shop example and the unhealthy treats example. We are dictated to so much, our behaviors are dictated to so much by our environment. We need to pay attention to that mindfully, weed out the habits that have become automatic that are not helpful, and kind of reverse engineer them, bring them into the light. Whereas the habits that are healthful, that are conducive to us moving towards the life that we want to live, they're the ones that we want to move into the automatic space. But for me, to get there, it has to move through a more conscious, deliberate practice kind of place. And it's just gonna feel clunky for a while, but you have to recognize what you need, number one, create the environment, number two, for the cues and context for those habits to sort of start to happen. And at that point, I think then that's discipline and maybe routine, isn't it? And if we keep doing that, eventually it might become embedded habit, which is where we want it to be. But that's a process that I literally just interpreted from our conversation. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, no, I mean that leads us nicely on to development of new habits.
Yeah.
So one of the points that I've taken from here is habits are thought to be developed through repeated experience of the behavior in the presence of cues or contextual features. And actually I had a bit of lined up for the summary, but I'm going to take it forward. They talk about a study where participants attended the gym across 12 weeks, and it was the attendance in the first 5 weeks that predicted subsequent attendance across the 12 weeks. So basically, if they attended for these 5 weeks, that was sort of critical, or the attendance in the first 5 weeks was critical for their habit formation, which I think is whether the number is right or not. I mean, people talk about 28 days, I think, to form a habit, but whether the number is, or whatever the number is, I think people like to have a number to be able to say, I just need to go for a month, and then that's me. I'm in. Then the struggle will be less. Or thinking about it sort of maybe a little bit more deeply, it's taking some of the responsibility, taking some of the choice out of their mind. So when they get up in the morning, it's I'm going because I'm doing these 5 weeks, not do I want to go or not.
Yeah. Really, really useful. I think this is I feel like this is one of the gold dust moments for athletes and coaches that might listen, because as coaches, we've worked together a lot. We've talked to each other and to athletes we've worked with about just start. Like, we're in Scotland, right? So there's a whole load of months coming up that are going to be dark and cold and pretty tricky. Exactly. Getting up in the morning, get to that pool session for 6 a.m. or whatever. But it's just, you're not trying to, you're never, ever, ever advising an athlete to get up and think about swimming 3.5K at 6 a.m. in the morning. You are literally saying, get out of bed. And when you've got out of bed, put your kit on. And then when you've done that, and it's step by step, it's just start. They're the two words, it's just start. Because if you can just start, then that's fine. And I like your idea as well of, don't think about the whole year. Just go, I'm just going to do the first, whatever feels manageable, right? And again, that's the thing, isn't it? What feels manageable to you as an individual in the context and the situation that you're in? What is manageable? Is it 3 times? Is it 28 days? Is it the next 4 weeks? Whatever. Just choose an amount of time that's manageable, just start. And like you said, according to the study, right, if you can get that first bit right, you're more likely to finish than someone who just focuses on finishing.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to when we started using HRV with the squad, we had a sort of flow chart of, how do you feel? What does your HRV say? And, a yes or no thing, or leading you to whether you should be training that day. And ultimately came down to start and see how you feel. Even if you feel, if you feel awful and your HRV says you feel awful, maybe, follow the data and all that sort of stuff. But if you're not quite sure, start and see how you feel. And it's a similar thing, because sometimes it's never going to feel nice at that time in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's a really key point. So there's obviously multiple layers of how we develop the habits, and we will talk about that in more depth on the next podcast. And we already spoke about, maybe this is an entire course for Elevate in the future. I think there's something in there. But yeah, that if we're just going to pick one thing out, it is just start.
Yeah, and so in terms of development, then, so I've got another wee quote here. So instead, habits relate to specific behaviors or patterns of action and are enacted in the absence of goals. So again, this links back to the word of the day, the automaticity, that's driving the behavior, not the desire to achieve a goal. However, and this is maybe something we've discussed before, the desire to achieve a goal could lead to the development of a habit. So maybe there's a kind of a hierarchy of how things go. You start with the goal, which leads to doing an action, which leads to behaviors, and then those behaviors, or some of those behaviors, maybe become a habit.
I think so. I think to pick out on what you just said, is it felt like we just strayed back onto the interaction of motivation and habit. And I think both are utterly key. Like, we have to have a reason to motivate the habit change, and then that gives power to the habit change, which then in turn gives power to our behavior, which is what we're trying to get to. But I think without the motivation, will we ever be motivated to actually do the habitual changes that we need? But I think if we only have the motivation, but we don't do the actual environmental habitual change, we never get the behavior change. So I think there has to be both of those. And I talk a lot on the course, the race blueprint course, but also on the 6 keys course about motivation. That's where I would start, because I still think that that's key. Then I think we go to, okay, so what are the habits that we need to make this happen? And that's a bit that I'd like to delve into more in the future. What's interesting to me then is that then, where does goal sit in all of that? Because it's something that we go to straight away within sport all the time. And yet this research is starting to suggest that maybe habits, motivations are the things that are going to get us to that goal. And so it's not just forming the goal alone, it's going to make that happen.
Yeah, and maybe we can take that onto a specific example. So, so there was an example in the paper of tying together goals and habits. So in this example, the goal is about losing weight, and they're doing this through changing diet and increasing physical activity. So within each of those changes, the diet and the physical activity, there are a number of behaviors that could become, so have the potential to become habits. So things that they're doing, but some of them may become habits, some of them may not. One of those examples might be having an apple with lunch instead of crisps, which is actually kind of a double whammy, because you're removing a bad habit and adding a good habit. Maybe do you want to have we think about how people could harness this, or maybe an example specific to sporting context?
Yeah, absolutely. So we might let's keep it really simple. Athletes like PBs, right? So we're going to try and PB or do something that we've not done before in sport, which could be a PB or it could be a new event, could be anything. So quite often as coaches and as athletes, we will sit down and we will go, right, what's the goal? And we'll define that goal and we'll say, right, we want to achieve this thing. Brilliant. Off you go. I think what we're saying here is that what we need to do is to then define like the actions that need to take place to make that goal more likely. So this is going to be individual, right? But it might be that one particular athlete actually needs to start training with some people because they always train alone. So just setting the goal won't work. We need to change the habits. So the first part of that, the action is, okay, let's join a club, let's join a group, let's start working with a coach. And then the behavior is to go along to that and to keep going along to that. And that's where I think we go into that clunky, mechanical, discipline based. I'm just going to keep doing it for a while. I'm going to start doing these behaviors. And then eventually, however long down the line, they're going to rock up at training and go, oh, I didn't have to put any effort into being here. I just did it because it's Tuesday night and that's the swim for the club.
Yeah.
And here I am now into a habituated behavior, which is leading to the action of better training, which is going to lead on to my PB. So hopefully that works as a practical example of how all of this works in the real world.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that. Like that example. I think there's a important is a relative term. There's a bit of a line between habits and routine, and realistically, maybe it doesn't make a difference. But so you mentioned swimming on a Tuesday night. Is that just routine, or is it a habit, or is there a difference between the two? Or is it that the habit is actually maybe finishing work at 5 so you can get home in time to have dinner and pack your stuff before you go? So it's actually this huge knock-on effect that allows you to so there's habits that allow you to complete your routine. How does that sound?
Habits allow you to complete the routine, I think, is a very nice summary. As you're talking, and the reason, I'll be honest, the reason I love recording these podcasts and the reason that we set them up is because it's a wonderful, it's like fertile ground for us to learn and kind of challenge our ideas, whilst we're also hopefully educating anyone that listens. And so this is really nice to think through because it's so fundamental when we think about enjoyment of sport and fulfillment of ambition within sport. It feels to me like the routine is the more conscious system to brain deliberate practice part that allows, like, that's like the framework within sort of intuitive, automatic, subconscious habits exist. And we have to move through routine to get things ingrained in habit, and then they exist within that framework of routine. So we need that, some people call it like a rule of life or a trellis. I think I've spoken about before, this kind of framework for our day-to-day. They are the conscious routines. And if we stick to that, what happens underneath that is all of these ingrained habits that are the real things that drive who we are, what we achieve, and who we become.
Yeah, no, and that's, I had a note actually that they mentioned that in the paper. So again, talking about the automaticity they say is consistent with some forms of dual process theories of behavior, which, as you mentioned, is the theory by in Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman and the other guy's book.
We'll just
where they talk
Daniel Kahneman.
Daniel Kahneman.
That's the one that we've got here. So
it's maybe the theory is by the two researchers, but the book's by him. So yeah, no, that's a good point, and I think the idea that it's moving, motivation and your goals are in your system too. Your conscious thinking, and you're moving them through, or moving the useful habits through to your system 1, so that it becomes automatic. Would you like a quick game of habit or not?
I would love a game of Habit or Not, but I feel
Okay.
like we need a theme tune and I don't have one to hand. But I'll see what I can do in the edit.
Okay. Driving.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Is that it? I thought there might be another sentence.
No, driving. I've got three potential habits or nots.
Um, well, I mean, maybe too often just habit, because and there's a danger in that, isn't there? Because we've ingrained it as a habit. We can drive without thinking, and that's dangerous because that's when accidents can happen.
Yeah. We can maybe do a summary because they're probably all quite similar. Swimming.
Okay. Well, I mean, very individual, isn't it? I think for most people who pick up swimming later in life, not habit,
Mm-hmm.
but elements of it might slowly become habit. And actually, Scott, I think that's a brilliant example of something that moves from, very practiced into potential habit. Yeah, I'd be about 20 years into my swimming. So I would say my breathing in swimming is habit.
Yeah.
But my catch mechanics still aren't.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking of is, and if you are swimming along quite happily, so you've been swimming for a while, you're swimming along quite happily, and you find your mind wandering, I think that's where maybe your bad habits, more than your good habits, your bad habits tend to kick in, and your catch goes. You find yourself pressing the water down instead of getting a good pullback, and you only realize when your shoulders start burning. Last one, habit or not, checking your phone without a notification prompt.
Habit.
Yeah.
Bad habit, Scott. Bad.
We get a big X mark across the screen there.
Yeah.
And just going back to driving as well, because I think this is an important one, and probably more complex than we've got time to discuss today. But I think that driving is a series of behaviors and actions, isn't it? I think slamming your brakes on when something runs in front of your car, good habit. Drifting into the middle lane or the fast lane on the motorway because that's what everyone does, and you're just, you're mindlessly driving, or as you said, driving without thinking, obviously bad habit. So, one, what we call driving being an action, one action is a lot more complex than breaking it down into being a habit or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think as well that much as that's a good example, as is the swimming one, what we're concerned with here as athletes and as coaches, and maybe just as humans who want to live as well as possible, is what are the habits that really form us into who we want to be and into the things that we do or don't achieve, and both rooting out the things that are working against us and identifying those and changing them, and then also finding and identifying the things that we need to start doing and creating an environment so that we move in the direction that we want to be. And a really great question to start that process is, an honest, it's quite a deep question and it can be quite scary to answer, is just who are you in 5 years? Who are you in 10 years? Are you becoming the person that you want to become? And we have to be honest with that answer. And then if that's not who you think, if you look at yourself in 10 years and you have, I don't want to become that person, then it's a case of going, well, what are the habits that are forming me into the person I don't want to be? What do I need to change?
And start putting that into practice as soon as possible, and you might see changes before long.
Exactly. And we can cover that in the next podcast.
Yes, that's a great idea. I have got a short summary to finish us off, and then maybe you can see if there's anything you want to add. Finishing off, so habits to change physical activity behavior, again, could be adapted for sport, but repeated successful experience in similar contexts is likely to lead to the development of habits. So repeating a behavior is what is most important to build that behavior. And then the flip side to that is on bad habits. it's about awareness and motivation to, as they put it in the paper, to engage in an alternative course of action and attach sufficient value to that action from the outset. It's obviously a lot harder to unlearn a habit than it is to learn a new habit, because you need that real awareness of when the bad habit kicks in. And I think that's, as you said, that's maybe a good topic for next time. Anything to add before we finish up?
Yeah, two things. I think if we're trying to weed out, jumping off your point, if we're trying to weed out the less helpful behavior or habit in our life, then we can do, I speak about on the Race Blueprint course, the 5 whys. So we can track that back. We can go, okay, why do I do that thing? Why? And we can burrow down. And that will sometimes get us back to the root cause of, okay, it's that thing. That's the thing that I need to change. So we're not just randomly changing stuff in the hope that it works. We're actually chasing back from a particular point to a particular thing. That's the habit that we need to change and identify. And I think the other thing, Scott, is just, I want to echo, I think, the point that I made earlier, but it's just to make it really clear that I don't think goal setting is all that we make it out to be sometimes in sport. Goals are not the thing. And simply goal setting is not the way to achieve what we want to achieve. And we can look at that through this model that we've discussed in the last half an hour of habits, environment, context, and cues are far more important. Second, we can look at it through the model of motivation is probably far more important. And third, we can look at it through the model that I talk through again on the Race Blueprint course, which is the vision is fine, but it doesn't work unless it's accompanied with the intention and then the means or capacity to be able to achieve it. So, it's somewhat controversial because everyone oscillates around this idea of goals, especially as we move to the beginning of a new season. But I'm not sure that goals are the thing.
Alone, not goals alone.
Alone. Nice addition. They are part of the thing.
Yeah.
But they alone can do very little.
Yeah. Nice. Good summary. Thank you very much, Joel. Good chat again today. And whether it's next week or not, we will pick up again on habits, because I think it's a topic with so much information to cover. So thank you, Joel. Thank you for listening. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Scott.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found that podcast really useful. And if you did, then it's just a sample of the information that's available across the Elevate platform. Where we want to drive you towards is the Team Elevate community pages. If you're enrolled on any one of the courses across the Elevate platform, you can sign up. And if you do, then it's the place where individuals like you can come together to grow, share ideas, ask questions, interact with us, and be the first to hear about upcoming courses and exclusive offers. So if you haven't signed up, sign up to Team Elevate now, and we hope to see you there soon.